All right, welcome back to another installment of the 411 on Wrestling Retro Review Series, as we're doing each and every Friday here on the podcast. I'm your host, Blake Lovell, and back with me this week, we've had him on for our first retro review we did a couple weeks ago, and he is back once again. You know him as the host of Dissecting Dynamite on 411 Mania, and that is, of course, Andy Perez. And Andy, we are going to be going all the way back to 2001 to discuss the 2001 Royal Rumble. How are you, my friend? And what did you think just overall going back and watching this Rumble from 20 years ago?
Oh my God! Oh, I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you. I always love being on the 411 on Wrestling podcast, and this show. Oh gosh, it's crazy, isn't it? Shows from this era they just really hit different, and and a lot of craziness, a lot of kookiness going on all throughout this show. But because of the context surrounding it, you believe it all, and it all makes sense. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, there was, you talk about different eras. This was a different era, and I think as you go through the show, there are a lot of things that stand out about things you probably wouldn't be seeing in today's era, but I think we always say that about the Attitude Era in comparison to today, whether you use PG or whatever you want to use to label this particular era in wrestling. But it was very different, but that did not mean that it did not stand out as what I think a lot of people believe was probably one of the better Rumbles they've ever had, and maybe from top to bottom, just with the undercard, maybe the best Rumble in history. But we'll decide that after we talk about it. But it is the 2001 Royal Rumble, January 21st, 2001, at the New Orleans Arena in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I'll tell you one thing, Andy, that stood out for me, and we see this more, I think now, WWE still does this, but they don't do it to the level that they used to. I think we see it a lot more like, AEW does it a lot, New Japan does it a lot. They seemingly use these video hype packages really, for everything. And it seemed like, they used to do such a great job with this. And again, they still do, but man, I just love the opening video packages they had in this era. Every pay-per-view, you knew you were getting one, and just the way they presented it, I thought it was always awesome.
Oh yeah, WWE video production is always top notch, but yeah, from this era, especially with the narration, with the voiceovers that they have, it always paints such a perfect picture. And this one paints it perfectly. For many entrants, this is the closest that they'll ever get to the WWF title. But for those that have held it, those who have tasted it, they've become like proverbial championship junkies per se, and they'll do whatever it takes to get that title back. Before their body gives out, at least. I've always wanted to work on these types of video packages for WWE, for WWF, for as long as I've been a fan. And one of these, this one was just top notch. And then from there, just going into the pyro, the absolutely war zone pyro, and the crowd is just crazy. You see the rainbow of colored signs, the camera flashes. Oh my gosh, what a hot show.
Yeah, we talked about it when we did the looking back at the Shield and the Wyatt family a couple weeks ago. Just watching the crowd, it's so different now because it's almost like we've been trained for the past 9-10 months of not having a full crowd like this, and when you actually see it, and it's something else. And especially during this era, as we know, the buy rates and the audience, everything was just so through the roof, and it was definitely another level. But by the way, the sponsor for this one, as was many throughout this era, 1-800-COLLECT, which was, just always 1-800-COLLECT. They love WWE and vice versa because, Andy, I don't know how many collect calls we were making back in this era, but I'll tell you, there were more collect calls made by wrestling fans than anybody because these guys were all over the place in terms of advertising.
Yeah, it must have been a successful business relationship because, like you said, all over the.
Yeah, they were everywhere for sure. So 1-800-COLLECT is your sponsor for this one. And immediately, they do the panning of the crowd, and this wound up being a theme that I caught throughout the evening here on the show. The Trish signs were everywhere. Everybody loved them some Trish Stratus, and there were a ton of signs. And one of the first ones that stood out to immediately tell you that this was a different era, Playboy, win Trish win. So that was one of several Trish Stratus signs that I caught, and we'll be bringing up some of the others later. But, the crowd loved them some Trish, and that's for sure, and she played a big role on this show as well. But before we get to what she did, let's start with the opening match. That was the Dudley Boyz versus Edge and Christian for the WWF Tag Team titles. And, I mean, this was one, I think, going back, Andy, we think about all the gimmick matches these teams had together with the Dudleys and Edge and Christian and the Hardys. And going back, I remember back, I'm like, wait, wasn't this like a tables match or something else? I'm like, wait a second, no, this is just a regular match. Like, so unusual to think back that these teams actually had regular matches that didn't involve someone flying off a ladder or going through a table or anything like that. They teased the table a couple times in here, but they really never got to anything to that level. But I thought this was, again, you knew the chemistry between these two. They had always worked well together. We saw it even more, as they progressed during their careers, just all the different matches that they've had together at this point. The build was that Edge and Christian have been using the concertos on them. They sent Bubba through a table, actually, on the previous SmackDown. And there were just lots of dastardly deeds that Edge and Christian were up to. I thought this was a really fun way to start the show. And again, it's funny just to think back that this was actually just a regular wrestling match and didn't involve a bunch of shenanigans outside of that.
Yeah, and both of these teams, as teams, probably at the peak of their powers at this point. Yeah. But yeah, a fun opening match. How do you feel about the use of like kayfabe concussions within storylines? Because looking back at it now, sometimes it can get a bit uncomfortable. And this scenario, it's particularly tough because there's obviously like a major element of truth to this. I mean, with the high risk matches that these teams have wrestled in the past, like unprotected chair shots, falling from crazy heights, and obviously there aren't any nets to break their fall. I mean, like Edge would go on to at least have a retiring at first from neck injuries. Christian would retire due to these concussions. And there have, of course, been reports in recent months of like Devon Dudley's health issues and things of that nature. So sometimes whenever they play around with concussions like that, looking back at storylines, it can sometimes make me uncomfortable. But the charisma of these two teams and how they work together, it's just undeniable. That's the thing.
Well, and I mean, as we're going to talk about here in a minute, they were not against playing up the real injuries with another match that they will have and just kind of playing them off in terms of making a storyline out of an injury, quote unquote. So we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, that was something. And, of course, you had someone else on the show, which we're about to talk about, where head trauma and that kind of stuff certainly played a role in terms of him. So, yeah, this was, man, and, and again, you talk about difference in eras. Just going back and, there's lots of chair shots on this show. We'll talk about, just some of the guys that took chair shots later in the Royal Rumble, basically turning into a hardcore match midway through. So there were lots of different elements like that, for sure. And in this one, I know one thing I always think back on is, my goodness, the what's up. Like Devon and Bubba, this was at the top of the what's up because everybody was doing it. And, man, they went for it here, or actually it was Edge and Christian went for it. Then Devon threw Edge onto Christian. Dudley's hit the 3D, win the titles, and then JR, who is our favorite. So if you listen to Dissecting Dynamite or watch it, we always love JR's throwing it to the picture-in-picture. But JR's line here of "those damn Dudleys have done it," JR was at his best at this point. There's no doubt about that.
Most definitely. That whole finishing sequence, I was a big fan of. That 3D countered into a spear and then a DDT, I think. And then, like you said, Edge and Christian trying the "what's up" only to get countered. And I think Christian's face went into Edge's crotch. I wonder if that reeked of awesomeness. But then a 3D for the win and a couple allegedly concussed tag team champions.
Yeah. This was, it was an interesting match. Again, I think a lot of people are always going to think about the ones they had with, the different stipulations and everything like that. But still a good match from these two teams, which you would expect given their careers to that point. All right, before the next match, we had some backstage shenanigans, and it started with Drew Carey. Yes, Drew Carey at the Royal Rumble, and he became a focal point here throughout the show and into the Rumble match. You had your backstage skits where Drew Carey's there, Vince McMahon saying that Steve Austin's going to be in the Rumble, Triple H getting his match against Kurt Angle for the title. Then you transition to Triple H with Stephanie. He wants her to play nice with Trish, and that's where Drew Carey comes in. Stephanie plays along and basically says that Trish is a big Drew Carey fan, so takes him to meet her. Then you've got the APA playing cards, showing each other their Royal Rumble numbers, which, as I'm going to talk about later on, didn't wind up really being anything or meaning anything. And then Crash Holly, who was friends with them at the time, basically saying he's going to come in and eliminate them. So this was the usual kind of era where you had lots of different backstage stuff, even on these pay-per-views. So lots of it here to kind of, bulk things up and lead us into the next match, which was Chris Jericho versus Chris Benoit in a ladder match for the Intercontinental title. And, of course, Andy, we talked about a second ago, head trauma. This was something that undoubtedly played a role in the whole Benoit situation, and I always say it's still to this point. Like, this was, 14 years ago almost now. It's still hard to go back and watch some of these matches with him and see some of the things that you see, just because it's, I think that human nature element of it, it's still really tough, even that many years later, knowing what happened, because there's just lots of different things. And really, one of those spots stood out right away in this match where you had Benoit go for the dive through the middle rope to the outside onto Jericho, but instead Jericho grabs a chair and throws it into Benoit's head as he's diving onto the floor. This was a match that was different from your usual ladder matches. They didn't really have a bunch of high spots. It was more of that technical ladder match, if you can call it that, where they're working different things in and doing moves on the ladder. You had Jericho with the octopus on top of the ladder. That was what Jim Ross called it. And then eventually Benoit using his power to push the ladder over with Jericho on top of it. I thought that was insane, where Benoit was laying under the ladder and somehow pushed it to where he pushed Jericho over on it. And then eventually it was Jericho throwing Benoit to the outside, grabbing the title to win it. A really good match, which, again, given the chemistry between these two, you're not going to be surprised by that. But it was a different ladder match in terms of usually these days we see all the high-flying moves and everything. This is more of a technical style, if you will.
Yeah, probably if it weren't for the whole Benoit situation, probably one of my favorite ladder matches of all time. Just a lot of creativity, and I think did they only use one ladder throughout this? This whole match?
I want to say that was right. Like I have to go back and look at it, but there weren't many. Like it's not now where we see like 5 or 6 scattered around, and it turns into 15. So.
But yeah, and this match is actually one of my earliest wrestling memories. I didn't actually start watching until end of 2002, beginning of 2003.
Yeah.
But when I did start watching, of course, just like anybody, I went to my local video store at the time and got all of the VHSs. I don't even remember if DVDs were prevalent at that time. But this was one of the first shows that I watched, and I remember really, really being attached to this match for obvious reasons. Like you said, a lot of really interesting spots that Benoit dived to the outside, Jericho catching him with the chair, Jericho with like a modified Russian leg sweep while Benoit was like stuck in the ladder up in the corner, Jericho using the ladder as like a slingshot over the top rope, catching Benoit like right under the chin, like a strong metal uppercut. But yeah, just a lot of creativity in this match. And yeah, Jericho ultimately winning. And Jericho was the one that picked the stipulation, and he proved his instincts right. But what an amazing match. Really makes you sit back and consider how long Jericho has been doing this stuff at this pun intended elite level. And of course, makes you reflect on what could have been with Benoit if it weren't for the terrible, tragic final days of his life.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was because of matches like this that it led to the brain issues, and then who knows what could have been.
Yeah, it's like I said, even for me, it's still different going back and watching his matches. But if you're able to just sort of look at it within that scope of that era, there's no doubt that this was one of the best at the time in terms of how they did this. And then again, the thing about, like you said, with Jericho, we're sitting here 20 years later, and he's still doing his thing in a very high profile spot. Maybe not doing these types of ladder matches, but he's still proven that he can go and do some of these matches. Yeah, this was really good. I mean, this was I think certainly from top to bottom, if you just if you didn't enjoy the Rumble, or if you don't grade the Royal Rumble in terms of doing match ratings and all that kind of stuff, this was the best thing on the show in terms of this match and the way it unfolded. Then we had more backstage shenanigans. Drew Carey is with Trish Stratus, and he's he's selling his accomplishments in life, and that's when Vince comes in, because we know that Vince and Trish had their thing going on at the time, and so Vince decides that if Drew Carey wants to impress fans, impress Trish, he's going to put him in the Rumble, and that's how he can do it. And then this was sort of some foreshadowing for our next match, Chyna with Billy Gunn. He's pleading with her not to wrestle. This is where they were playing up all the different sort of elements of Chyna's neck injury and all that, and we're going to get into that in just a second. But this was, again, a little foreshadowing with that. Jericho with Michael Cole with his frosted tips and talking about winning the title. Michael Cole here, man. It was, you want to talk about that? That's something that is different. Michael Cole's look in 2001 versus Michael Cole's look in 2021. This guy was, Michael Cole was 2001. I think we can say that.
He looks like an infant here. It's crazy how young he looks. But yeah, what you were talking about earlier with how the pay-per-views are structured with these backstage segments, it's really interesting to see how things have evolved, because really they usually go in groups of 3, and between each match there are like 3 backstage segments kind of acting as little scenes, cutting back and forth throughout these stories throughout the night, kind of padding each scene. But much different than how we see the programming structure today. And I really enjoyed it. It gives a pretty good balance with just the way that you're viewing the show, and even the way that the camera is moving in these backstage segments, like in that whole APA situation, the camera like moves in and kind of stays low rather than being locked like how it is nowadays. But these backstage segments, the way they're shot, more kinetic than we're used to, more movement. But yeah, very, very interesting to watch how they progress.
Yeah, and I think you had so many top stars like built to this point to where it's like, we got to give these guys outside of just the matches. Like we've got to find a way to put them on TV more, and we got to have them in more angles and segments. And I think it's what you saw here, with all the stuff with Trish and Vince and with Triple H and Stephanie, and I think there's just so many things like that where it's like we need these guys on for multiple segments rather than just putting them in a match. So that was definitely the theme here, and we saw that so much during the Attitude Era, where sometimes the angles themselves were bigger than the matches, for sure. And then that led us into the a video package pushing the entry from Chyna, and then at the hands of Ivory. Then I had the skits with Ivory mocking her with the neck brace and all this other stuff. And then that's where the actual match happens, if you want to call it that. Chyna versus Ivory, WWF Women's title. I'll tell you right away, Andy, of course, unless you go back and watch, like you forget sometimes, there's a lot of things you remember, but this was the first time in a long time, because I guess I haven't really watched anything from this era with this group, but my goodness, the right to censor entrance music with just this siren on and on and on, gotta be in the top 5 for one of the worst entrance music in the history of the world. But I will say, it was intended that way, so it wasn't like it was an accidental thing. It was intended to be awful, and man, just listening to that siren go off for 2+ minutes, I don't know how you couldn't hate the right to censor at that point.
And what's even worse, because of the Rumble later tonight, we're going to hear it what feels like 13 more times. I mean, it is truly terrible. I'm on board with that.
Yeah, it was awful, for sure. And so this was that point, and we'll talk about the other members later, to where, it started with Stevie Richards, and it eventually grew into bringing in all these different people, turning a couple people who were the opposite of right to censor, and putting them in there, but we'll talk about those guys in just a bit. This match was not very long. It was Chyna basically controlling the entire match, and then you have Chyna sort of playing up her neck injury. She goes for whatever it was, the handspring in the corner, and then goes to back into Ivory and basically just falls over, acts like she can't move. Ivory pins her right away to get the win. They go into full-on, serious mode on commentary. JR's voice gets lower. Lawler goes into the ring. Billy Gunn comes out. They bring out the stretcher. Everybody's quiet. And it's funny. Well, it's not funny, but I actually, on Grilling JR, they did the podcast really as today, as we're listening to this. I listened to it earlier, and, Jim Ross was basically talking about how this was one of those things where you get direction. This was the direction they wanted to go in terms of, Vince McMahon and everyone. This is how they wanted to play it up in terms of softening their voices and making it sound this way. But they did also bring up on the podcast sort of the parallels with that, with the whole Owen Hart situation and everything. And this is one that you look back on and you're like, ooh, this does not age well at all in terms of this angle. And I get what they were trying to do, I guess, because it was an angle and they had built up this whole Chyna neck injury thing. But the problem, I think, was if you actually watch the replay, which they showed multiple times, I'm actually surprised thinking back that they actually showed this, but like she barely hits her, like she barely touches her. And whenever she goes for the move, it's almost like she didn't even really make full contact at all. Had she made like that full contact where her neck just comes back, then I think maybe you can sell that a little bit better. But she barely touches her coming off the back handspring, and then just goes down. And I think most people in the audience knew what they were going for, but at the same time, I also think most people probably were groaning a little bit, going, this is what they're doing. I can't say this was anything worth watching at all because looking back on it, definitely one that does not age very well.
Yeah, if anything, the crowd just seems kind of confused. Yeah. I mean, another uncomfortable angle, and yeah, I just don't really think it lands on like a performance perspective. I mean, like Chyna, her performance is good in terms of just like acting, storytelling. Like her eyes are wide, she looks confused, like she doesn't know what's going on. Commentary sells it, but maybe it's because the move just didn't look very devastating. Maybe it's because the crowd is chanting for Sergeant Slaughter as she's being wheeled away. I mean, like I'm not sure, but yeah, another odd thing to incorporate into storylines, especially after like you said, several real life tragedies due to either botched circumstances or botched moves that have even led to like neck breaks and paralyzations up to this point. But still, I'm still always excited to watch Chyna from this era. She's such a force. And then Ivory, Ivory's usually fun to watch in the ring as well. So watching Chyna just fling around Ivory, getting up to that point, was still pretty enjoyable for me. But yeah, just kind of like a wet blanket of an ending and just kind of uncomfortable and awkward to watch.
Yeah, I think it's something else that JR brought up on his podcast is basically that, at this time, like Chyna didn't want to wrestle women. Like she wanted to, because like the year before we think about it, she's wrestling Jericho and, Hardcore Holly and you get the whole Intercontinental title situation and, that came off the Jeff Jarrett thing in '99. And so I think it's one of those things that's weird to think back on. But, Chyna was she was different. And there's no doubt about that in terms of what she was able to do and the believability that she added. And definitely this was not one of the highlights, I would say, of Chyna's wrestling career because this was just, this wasn't great at all. More backstage segments before we get to the championship match. Stephanie and Trish back at it again. I mean, they've been on the screen at this point, I think, in every backstage segment. Like, they're all over the place, but they were really playing this up, and we know what it's eventually going to lead to with those two. Drew Carey, he makes an appearance in the WWF locker room, and so does the Big Red Machine Kane, and that sets up a nice little tease for later on with those. D'Lo and Mosh, who were actually at this time, because Mosh was going as Chaz, they were doing the whole lowdown thing, which I barely remembered, with Tiger Ali Singh. Vince basically saying they are replaced by Drew Carey. Tiger Ali Singh not happy about that. It doesn't really matter because nothing's going to change there. Then, I thought, Andy, probably the Oscar performance of the night was Triple H grunting into a mirror and then headbutting it as he prepared for his WWF title match. I thought this was, for all the hell that people give Goldberg for hitting his head on the lockers and everything, Triple H grunting into a mirror and then headbutting it before he goes out for his match. I don't think that can be very safe at all either. So,
I don't know about you, but I found Triple H's backstage segments leading up to his match with Kurt Angle, at least on this pay-per-view, kind of awkward because, like you said earlier in the evening, he interacted with Drew Carey along with Stephanie. And he's just playing it super low key, doesn't seem very charismatic at all. I mean, like, we know what Triple H can do on the mic. We know the stories that he can sell, but he just wasn't selling the situation for me, at least. But yeah, and then yeah, his Goldberg cosplay here, it didn't really do it.
I'm gonna have to go back and see if I can get a screenshot of that to use as our image for this podcast when it goes up on the site and of course on YouTube and everything, because that's a great scene, and it was almost like, you know what, we got to get a Triple H, we got to get another segment backstage with him, and it's almost like we have nothing. What do we do? I know, let's just have him, grunt and then headbutt a mirror, and that's all we need. So that's what they went with, and then that was getting him prepared for the WWF title match, which was Triple H going up against the champion Kurt Angle. They did a hype video before the match, playing up the Triple H versus Angle, playing up the Vince and Trish affair, which, with the whole Stephanie and Trish, and a lot of connecting parts there in this one. And that is where, and then why, the Trish is the one that actually accompanies Angle out for this match, which you have Stephanie in Triple H's corner. And then, Andy, in sign number 2 that I caught for the evening on the Trish Stratus train here for the fans, it was, and again, you talk about signs, probably would not be let in, I think, today's era. I don't think you're going to be seeing this on the Thunderdome anywhere. There was a sign very clearly in the front row, I want to say it was the first or second row, "Hey Trish, spank me." So there you go. There was another Attitude Era sign, and boy, this was a match that I don't know that really reached the level of that sign, because this was a very methodical match. Like, I think that's probably the best way to put it. Looking back at Triple H and Angle, I don't know that they ever had any of the, like, I love both these guys, but I don't know that they ever had like that, just one big match in my mind that completely stands out above the others. I always thought the chemistry was good, but I don't want to say that it was great. I think their chemistry was better maybe outside the ring and some of the skits and stuff that they did versus the actual in-ring stuff. And he also, Andy, I thought it was different here because both of these two were heels, and like this was like you never really knew, because it was like Triple H all of a sudden was the heel for 1 second, and it was almost like really throughout the entire match, Angle felt like he was sort of the person that should be cheered in this thing, but the fans were still cheering Triple H at times. You had Triple H working on Angle's knee throughout, went for the figure 4, so kind of played up that Ric Flair-esque performance here from Triple H, and then Andy, that's where things really started to escalate, where get chaos everywhere. Where you've got Trish coming in to get involved, her and Stephanie going at it. They're fighting on the announce table. Vince comes out. He's putting Trish over his shoulder. Stephanie's chasing and attacks. Pretty much all hell broke loose after that.
Yeah, crazy match overall. I mean, in terms of the Kurt and Triple H, I guess, rivalry, it's probably, when you think about it, Kurt's longest lasting rivalry in the US, or in the WWE rather, stretching from, like 2000 all the way up to his return and Mania match with Rousey and Triple H and Stephanie back in 2017. But this particular storyline, like you said, the dynamic that they're playing with here is kind of difficult to work with in general. Kurt Angle going up against the McMahon Helmsley regime, I guess, and Kurt, like you said, employing the services of Trish Stratus, who's been entangled with that awkward affair with Vince McMahon that, of course, is going to be paid off over at WrestleMania 17. And then wrestling, it's always been called kind of like a testosterone fueled soap opera of sorts. And this storyline is truly representative of that point of view. What did you think of this type of, like, this era of storytelling here? A lot of involvement with Vince McMahon, and of course, looking at Lita's comments on McMahon and him forcing her into the live sex celebration. Of course, McMahon has his hands on Trish, has his hands on Sable, has his hands on just about every diva in this era. It once again a little awkward to watch in places, and of course with King on commentary, he doesn't make it any easier.
No, he doesn't. And you brought that up, and it was actually, who was it? One of the sites had Candice Michelle on too, and they were asking her about one of the things, like, what's it like, kissing Vince McMahon and a storyline and all that, and it was just like, I don't know, like you had Tori Wilson, we're talking about Trish, like it's just, I don't know, man. Vince was quite the character on screen, that's for sure, because he was a different cat for sure during this era. But this was something, like you said, sort of the soap opera style. I think the reason it worked was because, unlike today, it seems like they have a pretty long-term plan of where they wanted to go with this stuff. And, it did lead to Stephanie versus Trish at No Way Out the month later. And then, of course, even at that show, you had the great 3 Stages of Hell match with Triple H and Austin. And we're going to talk about Austin in a second. But I think the way that they paid everything off seemingly made it work better. And it's almost like you weren't just doing this to do it. You were doing it for a reason because you knew it was going to lead to something. And so even with all the interference here, we had Vince and Trish and Stephanie and everybody getting involved, you knew it was going to lead to something. And again, you had the same here with the actual finish in this match. Ref bumps, those were the things too during this era. Poor Earl Hebner, he just took a ton of ref bumps, and he actually took a couple here where he takes one with Triple H hitting him off the apron, and then he takes another by getting his head bounced into the steps. So this was probably not Earl's favorite night for sure. Triple H hits the pedigree, no referee, and that leads us to Steve Austin coming out, destroying Triple H, playing up the fact that Triple H had cost Stone Cold the title. And so you get the belt shot, the stunner, and then Earl Hebner with the slowest 3 count in the history of the world, which I can't blame the guy because he just got, punched off the apron and he got thrown into the steel steps. Earl Hebner took about 35 seconds to count to 3 here, but Angle covers, gets the win. As I said, I even enjoying both these two guys during this era, I just did not think this was a match that, it was just... I don't know. This just wasn't for me, I think, and I think that the heel dynamic may have added to that. I don't even know necessarily just the interference and stuff was a bad thing here because it kept the match sort of, I don't know, it just added a little bit more interest and entertainment to it. But the match itself, even though I love both these guys, I just did not think it was the best. And it's probably one that, I would not go back and just seek out unless I was just watching this show over, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, especially because, like you said, this finish is kind of quintessential Attitude Era with the belt shot and then the stunner, like the interference from Stone Cold, and then Kurt draping his arm over with the 3 count. Even he had a few finishes in title matches similar to this during this era. I mean, basically on another level though, the 6-man Armageddon Hell in a Cell similarly ended with Kurt taking advantage of somebody else using their finisher, just draping his arm over for the 3 count, squeaking out the win like that. So yeah, just not a lot to love in this match in terms of what they're doing in the ring and creativity. But still, Kurt's skills during this early era of his career are just incredible to watch. Like this opening stretch from his debut up until his departure in 2006. And right now I'm going to do a cheap plug for our Kurt Angle documentary that's over on the 411 Mania YouTube channel. But it may be one of the most impressive early WWE runs of all time. And then this match was he tries out his moonsault a lot, and not in this match in particular, but he always goes for the moonsault. He doesn't often hit it, but in this match, he finally hits it. 1 out of 50 times he gets to hit his moonsault.
Yeah, this was, again, I don't know. This is a match probably, I could recommend it in terms of if you haven't seen the show, go back and watch it. Especially, I mean, it's an important match, I guess, if you're talking about what's going to happen in the Rumble and what's going to happen at No Way Out in WrestleMania 17, because it does lead to some stuff, but not a ton else. I thought this was just sort of a very sort of slow, methodical type match, but you had some of those from Triple H when he worked as a heel, maybe even more so in his later years in terms of, maybe getting into 07, or we're just different places, but I think this was one definitely that, it was there, and I don't know that it was the best match in Royal Rumble history, but it was okay. All right, and now we get to the big match, the Royal Rumble. Before that, we had Kevin Kelly with The Rock. Kevin Kelly's interactions with The Rock were always fun, and who knew that 20 years later, The Rock would be the biggest movie star in the world, and Kevin Kelly would be the voice of New Japan Pro Wrestling. So there you go. There's your career trajectories for those two. But we do have the 2001 Royal Rumble match, and this was a star-studded affair here. You had it's fun to think back of all the different talents that they had at this time. This was 2001 for sure, because all of these different acts and different wrestlers they have in here, even some surprises we're going to talk about along the way. All right, Andy, we start. Jeff Hardy comes in at number 1. Bull Buchanan comes in at number 2. Not a whole lot happening there until we get Matt Hardy coming in at number 3. That's where Bull Buchanan gets eliminated, and they really start to play up that every man for himself aspect. They'd done this before in terms of having the tag team partners come in and just kind of, be in a situation where you're really playing up, okay, two tag guys going at each other, having a chance to really fight it out. That's the Royal Rumble. No one's teaming up. They're just trying to win, to get your shot at the title at WrestleMania. Farouk comes in at number 4. Farouk gets eliminated pretty quickly. And that's where I said earlier, they had the backstage skit with the APA talking about how it was so interesting when they showed each other their numbers. And I'm like, well, surely this is going to lead to something. And I'm like, it actually leads to absolutely nothing. Like, there's nothing to note here of that going back to it. So, because Bradshaw doesn't come in for a while.
They're a solid 12 entries away from
Yeah. And so that's why I was remembering back. I was like, I don't remember their spot in this match. And as I watched that, I was like, okay, well, surely it's going to lead to something. And I'm like, wait a second. This literally goes nowhere. But Matt and Jeff start ripping their shirts off and going after each other. So they're really playing up the fire between these two. And we will stop here at this next point and get some thoughts, because Drew Carey comes in at number 5, and the crowd is just, they're all into Drew. They're just giving these huge Drew chants. This, I think, Andy, the best way to put it is probably back before WWE completely obliterated the novelty of having these celebrity appearances. And it's not as though Drew Carey was just this huge, massive star at the time, but it was just different to see these guys, whereas, eventually they would get to the celebrity guest hosts and all this other stuff and bringing people in and out all over the place all the time. This was, it felt a little more rare there in this era. And then, so of course, you have him come in. Kane comes in at number 6. Before that, Jeff and Matt had eliminated each other, so leaving Drew on his own. And then Kane comes in at number 6, and that's where things get fun. So...
Yeah, that's the context of this celebrity entrant, I guess, was just completely different than what we're looking at today. If Drew Carey came out, well, let's take Drew Carey out of the equation, because if he came out at this year's Rumble, I'm sure people would be glad to see him. But if any other celebrity came out in a Royal Rumble nowadays, I'm sure that the internet would just tear it down. Yeah. But because of the context surrounding it. And of course, they even had a little bit of a story built in. Like you said, Drew Carey interacting with Kane earlier in the evening, and he doesn't quite get his comeuppance, but we get a bit of comedy.
Yeah, it was, you look at Kane coming in at number 6, and then, that's where you had the shenanigans of Drew Carey going for the handshake, and he tries to offer Kane the money. I thought this was really funny, too, and him begging for the Hardys to come back in the ring was also hilarious. So he did a good job, like you said. I mean, he did a good job just being in the spot, and he made the most of it. And then he eliminates himself shortly after Raven comes in at number 7, with Raven making the save as Kane went for the chokeslam on Drew Carey, but Drew's like, I'm out of here, and he throws himself over, and he's done. So Al Snow comes in way too early at number 8, but just because he wanted to get a nice attack in on Raven, and in one of the first hardcore spots of the night. It was not a good night for Raven either. We talked about Earl Hebner taking some bumps here. Well, Al Snow used a bowling ball to send it right into Raven's nether regions there, as he just rolled a strike into the corner. So Raven probably not feeling too great there with that one. Kane, takes some dueling trash can shots, and this is where the match sort of, goes into the hardcore era. Perry Saturn comes in at number 9. Terry Reynolds is out with him, and we talked about different eras. I think what Terry's wearing here on another level, and definitely part of the Attitude Era for sure. Steve Blackman at number 10. Again, this is basically a hardcore match. Like, there's weapons everywhere. Grandmaster Sexay coming in at number 11. I tell you this, Andy, I thought about this just, Rikishi at this time was not, he had turned heel at this point, and we'll get to him in a minute, but my goodness, like, the fans love Too Cool. Like, I think that's something you always think about, like, Grandmaster Sexay, Scotty 2 Hotty, who we'll also get to in a second. Man, I sometimes forget just how over these dudes were, but their act was really over at this time.
Oh, yeah. Even whenever they returned in, like, what was it, 2004, 2005, 2006, whenever that was, that they actually returned as Too Cool, they were always such a hot act. And it always seemed like Rikishi kind of resented that, unfortunately. But yeah, always a very, very hot act. And around this point is when you start really seeing the variety of this Rumble. Of course, early on, you have Matt and Jeff, the intrigue in that situation. Then you have the comedy coming in with Drew Carey. Then Kane's coming in. He's the big monster, and that's followed up by this huge little hardcore stint for about, I don't know what, 5 or 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And then the next entrant, number 12, right after Grandmaster Sexay, you have the Honky Tonk Man coming in for another spot. So yeah, just making sure that every type of fan that's viewing is staying interested throughout the match. It's not one note, and just a lot of different variables at play throughout the.
Yeah, Honky Tonk Man. That's well, and of course we know, like before that, Kane had eliminated everyone, so all the guys are out. It's just Kane in there, and then Honky Tonk Man comes out wanting to do his song, and he's basically just brushing Kane off. So Kane decides to hit him with a guitar and just basically shakes his head, eliminates Honky Tonk Man. So fans were happy about that. They appreciated that from Kane. The Rock at number 13. Drawing the unlucky number there. And something else I noticed, we also had this with The Undertaker later, but on the overlay of The Rock's entrance, they put his name up there and everything with the graphic. They're also advertising TheRock.com. So back in 2001, I don't remember visiting TheRock.com because we also had Undertaker.com later. I don't remember what they had with these websites, but I assume these were company-produced websites, but I don't really remember how they did these, but I have to assume that's what they were, because I'm just thinking back, I'm like, how many times did I visit TheRock.com in 2001? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can't say that I ever visited the webpage, but yeah, the birth of the internet, of course, getting huge around this time, WWE wanting to take as much advantage as they can, as they do with just about everything.
That's the case. So the Good Father comes in at number 14. So that's different. We talk about right to censor, and here was another one where the Good Father comes in. He gets thrown out pretty quick by The Rock. Taz comes in at number 15. Kane eliminates him in about 5 seconds, and the crowd was pissed at this, which that's another thing that JR talked about in the 2001 Royal Rumble podcast that he did, was about basically how things changed so much for Taz from a year before, where we think about in 2000 Royal Rumble, he comes out and makes Kurt Angle submit, and then 1 year later, it takes about 5 seconds in the Rumble, and he gets thrown out. So it was not a factor at all in this match. Bradshaw at number 16. Albert comes in at number 17. Hardcore Holly is number 18. K-Quick comes in at number 19. K-Quick, man, that's another one, man. Thinking back at K-Quick, and you say, hey, 20 years later, like he's still running strong too. I don't think that's one you probably would have predicted 20 years ago.
Not only is he running strong, he looks exactly the same.
He does.
It's like back in 2001, he might as well have jumped in a time machine and went and defended the 24/7 title, because that's what it's looking like. He oh my gosh, he has some sort of access to the fountain of youth. This guy.
Yeah, it's I mean, man, it's just. I don't know how he's done it. Yeah, I mean, he's been able to keep it going. But K-Quick to R-Truth, so still using the letter as the first part of his name, but changed it up a little bit. So K-Quick comes in at 19, and Val Venus comes in at number 20. He was with the right to censor at this point, so we get to hear that awful music again with him coming in at 20. William Regal is at number 21. Test at number 22. Test throws Regal out. That leads to a surprise return at this time, or just, people probably knew, but at this time, you did have someone make a return here, and it was the Big Show at number 23. Show goes on a run, quickly eliminates Test and K-Quick, and chokeslams pretty much the entire group that's in the ring. He gives everyone a chokeslam, but as the year before, where you had the finish with The Rock and the Big Show, a little more definitive here, as The Rock clothesline Big Show to eliminate him. Show goes after the announce table and decides that he's going to put The Rock over there with it. And so Big Show chokeslams The Rock through the announce table. Crash Holly's in at number 24. Everyone trying to gang up to throw The Undertaker out. And then, Andy, just as you would expect, number 25 is The Undertaker coming in to help his brother there in Kane.
Yeah, and seeing the Brothers of Destruction kind of have a team up here. Of course, there's that moment where they clear the ring and then they kind of stare at each other for a moment, and then poor Scotty Too Hottie comes out as number 26, I believe, and oh gosh, just iconic, just staring in the face of the Brothers of Destruction. They hit him with with that double choke slam. And oh my gosh, the Brothers of Destruction, seeing them work together is always just so fun.
Scotty 2 Hottie's facial expressions here, like, they are fantastic. Like, he comes out and he looks like that he is just this little kid that's just walked into, I don't know, just like a room full of monsters. And that's exactly what it was, because his facial expressions coming out to the ring were just great. He gets in, gets eliminated real quick. Rock still struggling to get up. And then Steve Austin is in at number 27. But before he can do anything of any substance, Triple H attacks him from behind. Rock is now back inside the ring, and Triple H and Austin start fighting. And my goodness, Austin is bleeding everywhere. Like, this guy does a blade job. I think Cody's probably still ahead of his in terms of the match he had with Dustin, but holy cow, like, Austin is bleeding pretty bad here from his head, and you can even see the gash a little bit later once he's back in the ring, and like, this gash in his head is just disgusting. But again, it goes back to what we said earlier with their playing up this, Triple H, Austin costing Triple H costing Austin, like, those back and forths here. So he tries to do that again here. Billy Gunn at number 28. There's another one. What do you know? Billy Gunn's still out doing his thing 20 years later. Billy using the one gimmick here. So he was the one Billy Gunn. Austin bleeding profusely still at this point. I mean, just disgusting. And then we get the final two, Haku at number 29, Rikishi at number 30. And, of course, we'd eventually get these two teaming up together. But they are the final two. Haku was actually a surprise return here. I don't think anyone expected that, because he was in WCW, I want to say, that same week, and maybe it jumped during that point. But he's here now as the surprise entrant, and that led to a pretty crazy sequence here towards the end, Andy.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. I mean, first of all, you need to comment on Haku and Undertaker's little interaction. Of course, or rather Rikishi and the Undertaker, I guess, because Undertaker, of course, trying to do the headbutts to the Samoan, and that never works out. Rikishi hitting him with a super kick, and Undertaker is out of there in kind of unceremonious fashion. Of course, not as much as Maven the next year, but
Yeah.
Man, I hate to see the Undertaker treated that way. One of my favorites that it hurts my heart.
I mean, Rikishi, they were pushing him, weren't they? I mean, we think back even, I guess, a month earlier, you had the big Armageddon six-way Hell in a Cell, and that'd come off the heels of Rikishi doing it for The Rock and all that stuff. But they were pushing Rikishi hard. There's no doubt about it at this point. But we did get to the Final Four in this match after Rock eliminated Rikishi, so I guess he finally gets the ultimate revenge there for that entire storyline. Final Four is down to The Rock, Steve Austin, Kane, and Billy Gunn. Austin throws Billy out, and this is where I think right after he throws Billy out, you get sort of a zoom into his forehead, and like the cut on his head is just insane. And then you have the stare down here, Andy, and this is the thing, like even going back to like Hogan and Warrior way back in the day, like you just knew at this point. I mean, we had already pretty much felt like they were going to get to Austin and Rock at WrestleMania, but I thought the video production here and just the camera work was fantastic in terms of how they did this, where it almost had that New Japan-esque like you get now, where you have guys just kind of staring at each other out of the corner before the match starts. You had Austin in one corner, Rock in the other corner. They're just staring each other down, and then they slowly walk to meet in the middle, and I just thought that was such a great spot here.
Oh, it's such a perfect tease, too, because, of course, we know that it's not going to be Austin and Rock in the final two. But yeah, this little tease here and just the facial expressions that we're playing with, Stone Cold with obviously that cold stare through his crimson mask, and Rock looking almost nervous at first before he goes up face to face with Austin. But yeah, the storytelling that they're doing here without saying a single word just shows two masters of their craft, and got everybody hyped for WrestleMania 17, even if they didn't know that was the main event at this point.
And then, you had the rest of it play out here. Austin with the stunner on the Rock. Rock eventually hits the rock bottom on Kane. Rock throws Kane out through the middle rope to the outside, so he's still in the match. Rock and Austin go solo for a bit. Kane back in, Austin and Rock fighting near the ropes, and this is where you get one of those frequent spots we've seen over the years where Kane throws the Rock out and Austin manages to stay in. So final two is Kane and Austin. Kane with a chokeslam on Austin. Austin with a low blow on Kane. Kane goes for the chair, but Austin hits the stunner. And 3 chair shots from Austin to Kane, and then a clothesline to eliminate Kane. And Austin is your winner of the 2001 Royal Rumble. Like we said, I think the biggest thing that stood out here was the obvious point they were trying to get to with Austin and Rock with the little stare down they had at the end. But man, Kane's performance here, which, this was part of that, him to that point holding the record of number of people being thrown out and how long he stayed in. I mean, we got to remember, Kane came in this match at number 6, and for a big man, we talk about all the guys over the years who were able to have those long, streaks of being in the Rumble and all that. I think we think back to Shawn Michaels in 95 at number 1. Rick Martel was the one that used to play up. Ric Flair winning it in 92, which we talked about last week from number 3. But Kane is a big man to be in there from number 6 all the way to the end. That's some stamina there for the Big Red Machine.
Yeah, and it's not like he was just laying around. When you're Kane, you have to be up and you have to be dominating throughout the majority of the match too, and that's obvious in the is it 11 or 12 entrance that he eliminated. At the time it was a record, yeah. But yeah, Kane super active throughout this whole Rumble, lasting it had to be well over 50 minutes. But yeah, just quite a performance here. Maybe even a career performance for Kane.
Yeah, it was, I think it was 11 is what it was for him holding the record, and he was in there 53 minutes and 46 seconds. So, yeah, just this is a rarity. We go back, and as we said, all the different guys you could point out have been in there a long time, but I think for a big guy like that who wasn't just laying in the corner, he was up doing stuff, as you mentioned, very impressive performance from Kane, was all over the place, and excellent performance from Kane, but the winner, Steve Austin, and that would lead to the eventual match between Austin and The Rock at WrestleMania. That would come after The Rock defeated Angle for the title at No Way Out. But Andy, your biggest takeaways here from the 2001 Royal Rumble, where do you think you would rank this? I'm sure without both of us going back and watching every one of them to compare right now, I'd have to say this... Again, show-wise, from top to bottom, back in the day, the undercard wasn't great on the Rumble. You just had kind of a lot of filler. Didn't necessarily have a ton of great matches, but this felt like one where every match, had meaning to it. There was something on the line pretty much in every match on this card. The undercard was pretty good, but the Rumble itself, I thought, was really structured very well. You had a lot of stuff coming out of that. I would have to say this has to be one of the best Rumbles they've done.
Oh yeah, without question, in the upper echelon of Rumble matches. Yeah, my biggest takeaway just has to be the amount of variety that they were playing with here. They didn't lean too far in one direction. You had of course, the amazing star power with Stone Cold and The Rock, and even with Kane. But yeah, Kane and the Undertaker playing the monster game. Even Big Show in there at one point for a little while. Had the big hardcore segment. You had the comedy spots. So yeah, just playing with a lot of different variables, lots of different directions. But if that's not my biggest takeaway, the thing that probably stood out to me the most is JR calling Albert a young man as he comes in the ring, which was very, very striking. Because yeah, he was a young man at this time, but he's always looked like like a 50-year-old biker or something like that. So Albert running into the ring and JR calling him a young man, it kind of took me aback for a moment. So yeah, if not the variety, that's probably my biggest takeaway.
There you go, Albert, 45 for the past 20 years. So that's it. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. This is certainly a recommend from me in terms of if you want to go back and watch some of these Rumbles to get ready for the 2021 edition of the Royal Rumble. This is one I would definitely put on my list because there was a lot of good stuff in here and a lot of star power for sure. When you go up and down the line with Austin, Rock, Taker, Kane, Triple H, Angle, Jericho, Benoit, like the tag teams, the Dudleys, Hardys, Edge, there's just, man, there's a lot of lot of stars here for sure in this one, and including our friend Drew Carey. So definitely lots of star power at the 2001 Royal Rumble. But Andy, this was a lot of fun. We're enjoying this here with our new retro review series. As I said earlier, we talked to Steve Cook last week for the 1992 Royal Rumble. And speaking of Steve Cook, you and Steve actually did a little talking yourself here recently as you guys covered the second night of New Year's Smash for AEW on Dissecting Dynamite. And I know you've got that up on the YouTube channel, but you've also got some Royal Rumble related stuff coming up here pretty soon as well.
Most definitely. We are working on a short history of the surprise Royal Rumble entrance. I don't know if Big Show is going to show up in that video or not. I don't know if Haku's going to show up in that video, but it's going to be a good one. Just outlining one of the most exciting aspects of the Royal Rumble, and that is, of course, the surprises that come along with it. So keep an eye out for that. That's coming out Royal Rumble weekend right there at the 411 Mania YouTube channel. In addition to that, if you guys haven't watched our best matches of 2020 video, that's featuring Blake, that's featuring Mr. Steve Cook, featuring Andrew Thompson over at Post Wrestling. Lots of great people involved in a really great video. So make sure you go and watch that as well. And just keep an eye out for all the great stuff that we have coming here at 411 Mania. Make sure you like and make sure you subscribe as always.
Yep, check all that out at the YouTube channel. We'll have the link to it in the show notes as always, so be sure to check that out. And we'll again have the link to the GoFundMe for Larry Zonka's family in the show notes as well. So continue to share and contribute if you can. Everything else over at 411mania.com. Check it all out over there. Subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app you use, you can find us on there. And thanks as always for listening to this episode of the podcast. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you next time here on the 411 on Wrestling Podcast.